delicious.
The pastor who tried to kill Hitler was how I first heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and it brought to mind something like an assassin pastor, clergyman by day, avenging hero by night. I now cringe at those memories, but as a young teenager I was fascinated by ideas of heroism against the man whose government symbolised ultimate evil. See, as a young Christian I wanted Bonhoeffer to represent a capable Christianity that took action on what was wrong in the world when no one else would. Well, I've grown up since then, and so has my understanding of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A man of many guises and celebrated across the Christian world, he remains a source of inspiration for me, but for quite different reasons. Bonhoeffer was involved in a conspiracy against Hitler, but he wasn't leading the charge when no one else dared. He did act bravely, but it wasn't through action hero type sabotage. And his legacy was not the attempt to remove Hitler, but a range of written academic and pastoral works so insightful that it continues to speak richly into our world over 70 years after his execution by the Nazi regime. So let's explore how Bonhoeffer became such a significant 20th century Christian figure. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was born on the 4th of February 1906 in Breslau, a then city of the German Empire, but is now in Poland. His parents were psychiatrist Karl Bonhoeffer and his wife Paula, a trained teacher. Dietrich was a twin and one of 8 children who grew up in a dutifully German, wealthy, middle-class household. A capable student, Dietrich's teacher-trained mother had prepared him well for academic life, including fostering a love and ability for music. When he was 6 years old, the Bonhoeffers moved from Breslau to Berlin, and here Dietrich would grow up and complete his schooling. It was in these schooling years that World War I would commence. A young Dietrich enthusiastically followed the events of the war until the family was devastated by the loss of one of his older brothers, Walter, who was killed on the front. This personal loss was soon compounded by chaos across the whole German Empire. The Kaiser or Emperor of Germany was forced to give up his throne after the Armistice of 1918, leading to the German Revolution, where amidst battles between communist and nationalist extremists, a new democracy was formed around a constitution written at the city of Weimar, lending this period the name Weimar Germany. Following the final peace settlement at Versailles in 1919, however, many Germans were dismayed by the harsh terms forced by France and its allies. Germany was made to take full responsibility for the war, had to pay substantial sums in reparations to other nations, and had its military substantially reduced. Its territories were divided up, occupied, demilitarised or given to other nations, and it also lost its colonies around the world. However, the communists and nationalists continued to agitate, especially in the face of a period of economic hardship where hyperinflation rendered German money almost useless. These hardships led many to look for quick fixes, which were promised by the statements of right-wing groups like the National Socialist German Workers' Party, who under the emerging leadership of Adolf Hitler promised to make Germany great again. Hitler's policies were aimed at strengthening opportunities for ethnic Germans, whom he labelled Aryans, at the expense of perceived enemies. Amidst his ideas were promises such as overturning the Treaty of Versailles, expanding German territory, creation of jobs for Aryan Germans, and introducing legal discrimination of ethnic minorities. These sorts of populist ideas were critiqued by the Bonhoeffer family, who were more generally supportive of the statesmen and politicians of the Republic, like Gustav Stresemann. For example, one of Bonhoeffer's letters from his latter school years reveals his dismissal of a man on a train who was narrow-mindedly right-wing. He said the only thing he'd forgotten was his swastika. Having completed his schooling in these politically turbulent years, Bonhoeffer then needed to choose the career path that he would follow in this new Germany. He settled on theology and the church over music, something of a surprise to a family that was not especially devout. He commenced his studies at Tübingen University in 1923. He also took up opportunities to travel internationally, and his thinking on religion and faith was broadened by his experiences of different cultures in Rome and North Africa. Relocating to Berlin University in 1924, Bonhoeffer studied under some of the significant theologians of his age. He also closely followed the work of Swiss scholar Karl Barth as a key conversation partner. Barth's writings reminded Bonhoeffer of the importance of God's Word, or revelation, which included scripture and preaching as crucial to Christian thought. Encouraged in his enthusiasm for studies by these scholars, mentors and muses, Bonhoeffer completed his doctorate Sanctorum Communio at 21 years of age. While completing this thesis, Bonhoeffer began teaching a Sunday school class where he developed an emerging interest in pastoral work. He passed his initial examination for Lutheran church ministry in 1927. As an assistant pastor at a German church in Spain, he regularly worked alongside people who were unemployed or impoverished throughout 1928. On return to Berlin, Bonhoeffer completed a second thesis, this time to qualify him as a professor in university faculty. He worked as an assistant lecturer while completing his work, Act and Being. In this period, what was to become known as the Great Depression would unfold as the American stock market began to lose value. This would result in widespread loss of jobs, something that would have a profound impact on Germany in the years to come. Coincidentally, at this time, Bonhoeffer, whose family wealth enabled him to ride out the Depression in relative comfort, undertook travel to the United States. He headed for a student exchange period in New York at Union Theological Seminary. While Bonhoeffer expressed his dismay at the lack of German rigour in theological scholarship there, his worldview was shaped by some significant friendships, including the pacifist French pastor Jean Lasserre. Bonhoeffer was also touched by the experience of meeting someone from France, Germany's traditional enemy, who firmly believed in peace. Bonhoeffer also met African-American Frank Fisher. Through this friendship, Bonhoeffer experienced a new way of being Christian, as he was introduced to the energy, music and charisma of the Abyssinian Baptist Church. As he travelled and reflected with Fisher, Bonhoeffer's thinking about freedom, faith and justice was challenged as he observed firsthand the discrimination experienced by African Americans in that time. Bonhoeffer returned to Germany in 1931, well equipped to further his chosen careers. Academically, he conducted lectures in Berlin. He also finally met his key influencer, Karl Barth, in person, building a respectful yet honest theological dialogue with him. In November of 1931, Bonhoeffer was ordained as a Lutheran pastor, initially working in chaplaincy and also conducting youth work in Berlin. Bonhoeffer's experiences abroad changed the way he viewed Christianity. His close friend and biographer Eberhard Bethge later explained this transition from theologian to Christian, noting that those who met him after 1931 were impressed by his personal commitment that engaged his entire personality and behaviour in innumerable ways. Bethge observed that more and more frequently Bonhoeffer quoted the Sermon on the Mount as a statement to be acted upon. He began taking a stand for Christian pacifism among his students and fellow clergy, although hardly anyone noticed at the time. To this end, Bonhoeffer became an advocate for peace and reconciliation in a war-sensitive Europe, attending international and inter-church gatherings such as the World Alliance meeting in Cambridge. Yet many Germans continued to dream of overturning the consequences of Versailles. Even among Bonhoeffer's own students, there were young men supportive of the goals of the Nazi Party. These goals approached reality when Hitler came to power in January 1933, with a combination of clever political campaigning and violent thuggery. Bonhoeffer was actually scheduled to speak in a radio broadcast, which coincided with Hitler's first day in office as Chancellor on February 1, 1933. His broadcast spoke of the way that young people of his time had begun to idolise the role of leader, approaching a cult of personality and collectivism. While not mentioning Hitler directly, Bonhoeffer therefore became one of the first public critics of the new Germany. Despite his criticism, the church was passive and even receptive to the measures of the new government, who started transforming Germany through discriminatory laws on minorities, including Jews, whom the Nazis blamed for Germany's troubles. Bonhoeffer's response was the essay The Church and the Jewish Question, where he challenged the church's belief that government was established by God and had a right to make laws over a nation as it saw fit. Bonhoeffer instead argues that sometimes the government needed to be held to account. Christians operating in good conscience needed to challenge the state by questioning the state, helping the victims of the state even if they do not belong to the Christian community, and finally by direct political action against the state by the church, seizing the wheel of the state itself. Bonhoeffer also helped draft the Bethel Confession, a statement against the pro-Nazi German Christians defending church autonomy and the Jewish Christians within it. In earlier drafts of the document, his colleague Wilhelm Vischer had declared, "It can never in any case be the mission of any nation to take revenge on the Jews." And also, we object to the attempt to make the German Protestant Church into a Reich Church for Christians of the Aryan race. However, when the most strongly worded phrases against anti-Semitism were removed, Bonhoeffer withdrew his support for the document and made plans to leave Germany for a church post in London. Manipulated by the pro-Nazi German Christians movement, the German Evangelical Church adopted the government's policies, effectively agreeing to the removal of pastors of Jewish descent in September 1933. This would lead to further attacks on Jewish Christians later on. In response, Bonhoeffer joined with Martin Niemöller to establish the Pastors' Emergency League, defending the rights of Christian Jews to be pastors in Germany and condemning the German Christians as heretical. Despite thousands of pastors adding their voice to the League, the German Christians seemed to grow in power, so Bonhoeffer followed through with his decision to go to London. From his congregation there, he advocated against what was now called the Reichschurch, the official church of the German state that incorporated the other major Protestant denominations into it. Bonhoeffer also spent time strengthening his ecumenical interchurch contacts, developing a friendship with Anglican Bishop George Bell, and making speeches advocating peace in Europe. Meanwhile, the church struggle continued in Germany, leading to the Barmen Declaration and the establishment of the Confessing Church, consisting of those who refused to participate in a church governed by the Nazis. After 2 years, Bonhoeffer returned to Germany to take up post of director of the Confessing Church Seminary in April 1935. This was made difficult as the Confessing Church was declared invalid, and teachers and students at the seminaries faced the possibility of arrest. Additionally, Bonhoeffer lost his permission to teach at Berlin University in 1936 because of his unpopular opinions. His thinking on how to respond and live as a Christian through these challenges produced his work of discipleship. From 1935 to 1937, Bonhoeffer trained pastors for the Confessing Church at remote sites in northern Germany in order to avoid government interference. The main location of his work was in the town of Finkenwalde, where Bonhoeffer sought a new kind of monasticism. He focused on theological education, spiritual formation and community building. He encouraged students not only to study biblical languages and theology, but to pray together, work together, sing together and play together. They developed spiritual disciplines of silence and confession to one another. Later, his book Life Together would summarise his thoughts and learnings from this period. Finkenwalde was closed by the Gestapo in 1937. Bonhoeffer continued teaching his students at a range of locations for a time, but soon had to consider his position against a state that had become increasingly authoritarian. Confessing Church leader Martin Niemöller had been sent to a concentration camp, and now all pastors in the German church were required to take an oath of loyalty to Hitler or be dismissed. Bonhoeffer felt disappointed and betrayed when the Confessing Church effectively agreed to this, compromising its founding stance that Christ was the head of the church. For his oppositional activities in 1938, Bonhoeffer was banned from living in Berlin, where his family and friends were located. Bonhoeffer's concerns were further compounded as Hitler acted upon his promises to overturn the Treaty of Versailles. He rebuilt German armies and incorporated neighbouring territories. Despite international efforts to appease Hitler's grievances, war in Europe was likely. Concerned about being drafted to the military, which was at odds with his commitment to pacifism, Bonhoeffer decided to travel. He visited international contacts in London before returning to the United States in 1939, where Union Seminary professor Reinhold Niebuhr had facilitated invitations for him to teach. However, the stay was short. Bonhoeffer returned to Berlin on the 27th of July 1939, having written to Niebuhr, "I've made a mistake in coming to America. I must live through this difficult period of our national history with the Christian people of Germany. I will have no right to participate in the reconstruction of Christian life in Germany after the war if I do not share the trials of this time with my people. Christians in Germany will face the terrible alternative of either willing the defeat of their nation in order that Christian civilization may survive, or willing the victory of their nation and thereby destroying our civilization." Barely a month after his return, World War II commenced with Germany's invasion of Poland. Bonhoeffer initially resumed his activities with the Confessing Church trainees. However, by 1940, his politically connected brother-in-law Hans von Dohnanyi informed Bonhoeffer of the atrocities happening in Nazi-occupied Poland. Through Hans, Bonhoeffer then connected with the German resistance. He joined the military intelligence agency Abwehr as a civilian agent, under the excuse that his church contacts could provide useful intelligence in the war. This would give Bonhoeffer some pretext for avoiding military service. More importantly, it would allow him to travel internationally as an Abwehr agent, where he could seek out Allied support for the resistance. It also provided opportunity for Bonhoeffer to visit Berlin in spite of his speaking ban. Here he was able to stay with his parents and worked on some of his theological ideas. Bonhoeffer wrote the beginning of what was intended to be a major work called Ethics. While unfinished, it was here that Bonhoeffer wrestled with the failures of his church and the ethical conundrum of breaking the law. He suggests genuine guiltlessness is demonstrated precisely by entering into community with the guilt of other human beings for their sake. Amidst this community of guilt in his resistance role, Bonhoeffer helped von den Arnie and Abwehr commander Wilhelm Canaris to arrange Operation 7. Together they used Abwehr resources to arrange for Jewish civilians to escape from Germany through Switzerland in 1942. In his ethical wrestle between obedience to conscience and breaking the law, Bonhoeffer ultimately became party to plans for Hitler's assassination, and he sought international support for the resistance in the event they were successful. However, before that plan could be seen through, Bonhoeffer was arrested on suspicion of corruption on April 5, 1943, around his use of Abwehr resources and for avoiding military duty. He was sent to Tegel prison on the outskirts of Berlin, where he spent the next year and a half. In this time, Bonhoeffer was still able to correspond through coded messages sent via his fiancée, Maria von Werdenmeyer, to whom he had become engaged shortly before his arrest. This collection of prison writings from Tegel have been well studied due to their sometimes bleak yet thoughtful considerations on the future of religion in the world. Among these works was also the poem New Year 1945, written as a gift to Maria reflecting on God's providence through suffering. It concludes, "By powers of good so wondrously protected, we wait with confidence before what may. God is with us night and in the morning, and almost certainly on each new day." Later the poem would be converted into a hymn appropriately sung among a number of other versions to the Finnish resistance tune, Finlandia. Bonhoeffer's prison situation soon changed drastically, however, following the failed bomb plot on Hitler's life headed by Klaus von Stauffenberg on the 20th of July 1944. In the aftermath of this event, government agents were able to identify key resistance members, and Bonhoeffer's link to Canaris and von den Arnie was discovered. Bonhoeffer was transferred initially to the Reich Security Office in Berlin, where he was interrogated. Later, as Allied forces closed in on Berlin, resistance figures were transported to concentration camps or rapidly tried in hastily convened courts. In this fashion, Bonhoeffer's brother Klaus and brothers-in-law von den Arnie and Rudiger Schleicher would all be executed for their stance against National Socialism. Bonhoeffer himself was relocated from Berlin to Buchenwald camp before being executed at Flossenburg on the 8th of April 1945, only a month before the end of the war. Since his death, Bonhoeffer's life has been extensively studied and critiqued. He has been adapted, adopted, glorified, sanctified, criticised and misused. He has been made a figurehead for everything from right-wing American evangelicalism to outright rejection of religion. While the discussion of how that has happened can't be explored here, let's briefly summarise what we consider Bonhoeffer's legacy to be from his storied life. Bonhoeffer was a critical thinker. He was willing to engage with his influences thoughtfully and forthrightly. He was not to be cowed by mainline authorities, whether it was traditional Lutheranism, liberal academic criticism, National Socialism, or even his key conversation partner, Karl Barth. Bonhoeffer was creative. He constantly grappled with new ways of thinking, being and doing. From Finkenwalde to his prison writings, he would thoughtfully and even playfully pursue new avenues and opportunities for his ideas and duties. His commitment to writing down his thoughts and observations gave us a rich library of material to draw upon, which continues to inspire new theological work today. Bonhoeffer was compassionate. He recognised the need to act for those who were being oppressed by society, from the African American community to eventually understanding the impact on the Jews of Europe. As he found his voice, he recognised that acting for the oppressed was part of Christian vocation. Bonhoeffer was conciliatory. Influenced by the peace movement, he sought to mend relationships between the German nation and those abroad. His desire to work with other nations and other Christian denominations was evident through to the end, his final words including a greeting of Christian solidarity to the English Anglican Bishop George Bell. Finally, Bonhoeffer was credible. He demonstrated integrity in the way that he lived. He was not perfect and took time to learn to think internationally, compassionately and radically in response to the Sermon on the Mount. Yet his writings reveal an earnest authenticity in his ethical struggles and an honesty in the way he grappled with ethical conundrums. While others of his age might have engaged in pacifism earlier, resisted more clearly or been more prominent theologically, the unique combination of factors that consist of Bonhoeffer's life make his a unique study, a tragedy and triumph which still can and should shape generations of Christians and thinkers to come.